This recording will be available on a dedicated website that only the people in this room have, or the people that were invited to this room. And so that you guys will have access to go back and look and hear what the different things are. Hopefully, I've never quite recorded it this way, but I think each of the different breakout rooms that we're going to go to in a little bit will be on there, so that even though you didn't get to hear what somebody else said in another room, you'll hear the response back, but you'll also get a chance to be able to see what the types of things that they were talking about in the different rooms. When we go to those rooms, what we're going to do is begin to fine tune some of the things we want to do. Our purpose as a group, as I understand it, is to try to say, how do we make a difference here in the Tucson area? What do we do? What are the priorities we have? How do we move forward so that we, in some way or another, help and protect those young people that are trying to figure out what to do with orientations that don't fit, with bodies that aren't defined well by traditional methods, by something that lies outside of the accepted norm, and how do we help them to have that be a good norm for them? How do we help them to find the support and the guidance to be able to take the steps that they need to take? So thank you all for being here during this time. We're going to do 3 rooms in just a little bit. Let me tell you what they are, because you get to choose which of these rooms you're going to be in. And we'll have some of our team, our planning team that are going to be there. I won't tell you where the smart part of the planning team is at. You're just going to have to take your chance. But we're going to have a room on community education. How do we help the community know better what's going on? The second room is future event planning. What other events do we want to have? It was such a successful event, having all those people all together, all those different voices in one space. How do we continue to do that and bring those voices together? And the third room is political advocacy and activism. In a little bit, you're gonna choose which one of those rooms you would like to be in. What we really want this to be is a place where everyone can share, where you can ask questions, where, especially if you have one of our panelists in your room, you can say, tell me more about this that I heard you say before. And allow them to be able to elaborate or to ask you back, well, what do you think? How will you do this type of thing that I was saying? All right, so what we want this to be is a dialogue as much as possible. So I'm going to stop talking. Any questions from you before we go? I'm going to open up the different rooms. You're going to have to choose A, B, or C. It has the names on them. And then in those rooms, just begin talking. We'll be in those rooms for about half an hour, and then we'll come back together to kind of share what the different rooms said. All right? Here are your rooms. Just choose whichever room and go into that room. Can you see them?
I don't see them yet, Jim.
I don't see him, Jim.
Okay. It says they're out there. It should be a little pop-up box.
There's a
at the
button at the
bottom.
bottom.
Yeah, it says breakout rooms there
So
at
if
the
you
bottom.
click on that, you'll get a pop-up that will give you the 3. It would be helpful to know who is the facilitator for each of those. I know you didn't want to give advance notice, but
Okay.
it might be helpful for some of us that are supposed to be supporting one person. We don't know where they're going to be.
Okay, Paula, we are going to be, you and I are going to be in future event planning.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Did everyone find how to do that?
So we just click on join.
Yep, just click on join in the different rooms. Michael, did you find it? You're muted. Did you find where you can do it, Michael?
I'm trying to get into future event planning, but
Okay. So what you should be able to do is click on breakout rooms. A thing should pop up,
right,
and
I got
then
that.
future event planning should have a blue button off to the one side that says join.
It doesn't have that blue button.
Let me
Okay,
see if I can assign you to that room. Let me see. All right, I think
Okay.
you're going there.
Well, there's Jim.
All right, everyone is in a room, and we are
Okay.
the future event planning room.
Okay.
So what we have to decide is what events will help. So let's just start off and introduce each other. I mean, maybe Michael and Paula, you know each other. I know both of you,
I
but
don't know. Yeah.
will you take a moment just to say who you are?
I'm Michael Hutchins. I'm a retired school counselor and counselor educator. And I've had counseling practice in Tucson, for about 30 years. And I've also been the president of Counselors for Social Justice, which is a division of the American Counseling Association. And I've done a lot of work on mental health advocacy in the counseling profession.
Nice.
And what is St. Francis your
I'm just
home church, so to
I-
speak?
hang out there, and I'm not a member, but I'm going frequently, and I've been doing that on and off since 1988, around there sometime.
And we kind of keep Michael around because he's a pretty face.
Yeah.
Paula, will you introduce?
Sure. Yeah, Michael, it's nice to meet you. My name is Paula Van Ness. I'm a member of St. Francis. And I'm pretty involved in a few things, chairing the finance committee, serving on the Charting the Course strategic planning group, serving on the church council. In my professional life, I retired after a career of being executive director, CEO of nonprofit organizations over the last 40-some years. Came to Tucson to retire and promptly unretired. And I work for the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona, where I direct something that I created called the Center for Healthy Nonprofits.
Okay.
And I spent 12 years of my life working on AIDS, and that is what left a lasting impression on me about the trials and tribulations of young LGBTQ people. And so I'm here out of that concern that has been with me for a long time.
Yeah, I was on the first executive board for the Tucson AIDS Project.
Okay.
Nice.
I was part of the founding of TAP, and then I was on the board of the Alliance Fund and was on the advisory board to the mayor and city council on LGBTQ issues probably 15 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
that's my, yeah.
Wonderful.
I think in one of my lives, we provided funding to the Tucson AIDS Project when it began. It was called the National Community AIDS Partnership, the National AIDS Fund. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So,
Okay.
well, this is great. And then Jim, is there something you can tell us that we don't know about you?
Let me think. Do you know I used to do mime? As president of the
surprise.
mime club when I was a senior in college.
Okay.
All right.
Has nothing to do with our topic. All right, so our job is to think about what kind of events we might want to do. The two events that we had a month and a half ago were good events. The one more focused on youth, the other more focused on community. I think both of those structures, both of those emphases are important ones. So let's just kind of think about
I'd
those
like to,
kinds of things. What do we want to provide for youth, and what do we want to provide for us as adults?
I'd like to see us involving the youth in whatever we do from here on forward, so that we don't have that separation between youth and adults. And I've got a particular interest, particularly in having older members of the LGBTQ community working with younger members of the community, because I think that's important for both generations.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's looking at some of the needs of the older community with the isolation and loneliness, in addition to what's been going on historically, and then would you add COVID to that?
Yeah.
But also the fact that young folks see the world so very differently from the way my generation sees the world.
Yeah.
And I would like to go in whatever we do next as students, rather than people telling us, telling people, this is what you need to do.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you.
Got to be better listeners. I'm wondering, Jim, one of the things that we had talked about before was this is an opportunity to be a voice from a faith community, from several faith communities that hasn't been heard so clearly in the past, that is supportive of these young people. And so I'm wondering if we might need to have a series of events that would be outreach to faith communities to talk with them about some of these issues, try to, bring them into the fold and really form a real coalition.
Yeah. Part of what Paul is talking about is, we had a little conversation before this, is that very often faith community has seemed to be the antithesis to good community for the LGBT community.
Right.
And how do we do something that begins to change that narrative? I think Tracy Kurtzman in that document, if you looked at her responses, I don't know what I did with my copy of that document. It's just right here. Anyway, what she wrote about was just marvelous. And she's, where she just very strongly said that, how did she put it? We need liberal Christians to speak up for separation of church and state. The evangelical right gives plenty of lip service to respecting the Constitution, but their policies are absolutely in conflict. We need liberal Christians to speak up for healthcare legislation based on science, not the Bible. And I think that's an important thing. My take on why the religious right is as strong as it is right now is because the religious left didn't say, you guys are idiots. And we don't say it that way because we're kind of nice. But we also have to figure out some kind of way to say, that's not the only thing that's out there.
And I think we would have like-minded people scattered around in different denominations and faith groups. I think we could really, I think, anticipate some great support from the Jewish community. I just don't know how, if we really want to have a broad-based coalition that can have an impact, how we attract those people without actually very actively going about reaching out to them and talking with them and encouraging them to join. And so for me, those are fundamental events that can help us build some strength and learn more from the young people about by listening to them of what they really want and need.
So Michael.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, we've got a model for this already. And we've got a model for this with Tihan, because Tihan started out at St. Francis when the religious communities in this town didn't want to touch AIDS. So how did we go about doing that?
Yeah,
Scott Blades was just working as someone at St. Francis, doing nothing related particularly to advocacy, and it grew out of that. So there's our model, and I'm not sure exactly how that developed,
yeah, yeah.
but that may be worth exploring somehow.
Right. And I think it's that type of question we need to answer. Let me real quick address April. April, I pulled you into this room. This is the room on future event planning. And you can stay with us. We're all really nice people. Don't bite very hard. But if you'd rather be in one of the other two rooms, I can send you over there as well.
So I was running late with my schedule for today, so I'm just joining, so I'm not familiar with the format.
Okay, so we have three different groups. One is called political advocacy activism. One is community education. One is future event planning. And so what we're doing is just kind of talking and sharing and saying, what do we do in those different areas? We'll be in here for about 15 minutes longer, and then we'll go back into the larger rooms.
Okay, thank
So
you.
if you feel comfortable with us, just stay with us. Like I say, Paul is the only one I know that I've been bitten by, but that was only
Virtual
once.
biting, huh?
That was only once, yeah.
That's why we're on Zoom and not in person. Yeah.
Right.
And so what we're talking about is what are the different events? Were you at the either of the events?
Yeah, I was at the in-person event with the presentations. Was there another one?
There was one in the morning that was more for youth, and then in the afternoon it was more for community members. And some people were at both, and some people were just one or the other. So you were probably at the afternoon one.
Came in the afternoon,
Uh-huh,
evening.
uh-huh,
Yeah.
uh-huh. Good. And tell me where's your connection?
Well, let's see. Primarily, I'm a psychotherapist that works with the queer and gender variant community.
Nice.
And I primarily work with adults. I mean, I have worked a little bit with youth, but primarily I see adults. And I do have a family member, a youth family member, a niece, my brother's child, who's exploring their gender. They don't live here in Arizona, though. They are in the evil state of Florida.
Oh my
So
gosh.
shit show.
Quite the crazy thing there. Michael, you have some ties. Michael has a counseling background, so he's in a similar type of.
And I had a psychotherapy practice in town for 30 years.
Michael
So-
Hutchison, you sound kind of familiar.
I've been around making trouble for a while, so yeah.
That's great. And April, are you affiliated with any particular faith community, or you're coming at it as a professional with that hat on only?
Yes, I'm spiritual, but not religious. My upbringing was more of a cultural impact, cultural Jewish and Lutheran. So neither of my parents emphasized religion in our upbringing by their choice. But I'm open. I respect and appreciate religion can be a very helpful resource, but I am coming from more of a professional.
Yeah, no, and I think we've got to get both sides together. I'm the pastor here at St. Francis in the Foothills, and we've been long advocates for, but I feel like there's too few. I don't know. Maybe I should say that there's a really loud voice that is contrary to the whole community, and which makes it really hard for those of us that feel like we're advocates for and aligned with the community to be able to feel like we can be seen as helpful. Right.
Uphill battle. I mean, I appreciate St. Francis. I've been in the Tucson community over 25 years now or something. And St. Francis has been one of the most is it called reconciling or respectful of the queer community? I've been part of queer community since the 90s, and
Yeah.
that's where my work is, and I identify as queer, so it's like I bring that to my personal life, my professional life, my I do advocacy in any of the agencies I've worked for, educational settings, and so yeah, that's where I come from.
Nice, thank you. And as to your two words you use, we usually say reconciling, but I would take just respect it, because in a lot of areas of this, there's been a whole lot of not respect for anybody who advocates for, right? And somehow we have to change that. I think the Supreme Court decision started us down a better road and gave some permissions that we hadn't had before that. But still, there's just so much backlash from specifically the conservative religious community.
Yeah, there's a lot of ugly history, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And we just can't let their voices be the only ones that are heard.
Mhm.
Question. My experience in Tucson is that the Tucson community historically has been pretty open and welcoming of the queer community. And I don't know how young folks are encountering that kind of bias in Tucson at this point. And maybe, April, if you're working with, you're not working, you said you're not working primarily with kids. So I'm just wondering if kids are finding safe places in Tucson, as opposed to, I can look at the state of Arizona and there's lots of danger in the state of Arizona, but I'm not sure how hostile the Tucson community is to queer kids.
Yeah, it's varied. We used to have an amazing resource when I first moved here in the late 90s called Wingspan
Right.
LGBTQ Community Center.
Right.
And Eon Youth Center was an offshoot of that. Wingspan closed, but Eon came under the umbrella of SAFE,
Right.
Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation. So I'm pretty sure they're still doing their thing. They're on 4th Avenue and have a whole different structure and stuff. But
once upon a time, I was on the board of Wingspan. So
okay.
right at the very beginning. So I'm familiar with some of the history stuff, but I haven't been very active in the last several years.
Yeah, they closed in 2008 when the whole crash came, because they were nonprofit, primarily funded by grant monies and donations. And if you remember the gala annually that brought in a lot of money from the community, it was a big fundraiser, dance event, etc. And all of that just basically dried up when things went in the shitter in 2008, and it hasn't been able to be cohesive since then. And it's hard. I mean, SAGA, Southern Arizona Gender Alliance, has been a really strong presence in Tucson specifically. And little history, that organization was known as being one of the first putting in legislation for rights around gender as not being, prejudice against gender, and bringing that out. And there's several individuals that were very key in that whole movement. And I just think that the current politics in the past almost 10 years has shifted, and because we seem to be a red state, even though Tucson seems to be blue in areas, it's just changed some of the feelings around it. And and if politics is saying, well, this is how the law is, then people are swayed who are in that camp. And it's hard, because it's like there was just so much work that's been done in the Tucson community by the queer community to you know, bring in supportive environments. And it's just really hard right now to see how, you know, politics is shifting the attitudes all around.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, do you think that today we need to rediscover some of those connections? Do you think they're there somewhere? But I mean, because we've got lots of good organizations. Are they just not connected to each other, or what's your feeling?
I think we lost some cohesivity when Wingspan disbanded, because they were really a core, like all sorts of groups met there, both social and community networking. I mean, it was such a front, a presence, and it feels just more disjointed. The community feels more disjointed. Yeah. But as far as professionally, you know, as far as psychotherapists, we have our networking, and there is a group of us who are, you know, identify as queer clinicians that work specifically in the community, and we do our consultations and try to, you know, do our networking and consult, you know, send clients referrals within that. So yeah, Michael, I don't know if you remember TGNet. There was the Goodrum Project that was an advocacy group in the early aughts. I was part of that advocacy. It was an offshoot of Saga. Actually, they kind of came together. TGNet and Saga came together, and it was specifically for medical and mental health professionals and other services, social services, to be able to have like an advocacy and education network. And at work, there was an at-work program training. Do you remember any of that? I don't know if you were hooked in.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of history.
My question is, I mean, the first, we called it at that point, Gay and Lesbian Therapist Network, formed in the early 90s. And so the mental health network has grown out of that, but I've been out of practice now since for 8 years. So I'm no longer on that cutting edge of those kinds of things. So my question is there some way to tap into that network of mental health professionals as part of our planning for where do we go from here?
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of why I wanted to come to, you know, these meetings, is to kind of be a segue to bring our profession in, because, you know, we're seeing and hearing the impact that this anti-legislation, I say anti-queer legislation is happening. And, you know, a lot of my clients that are gender variant are like, I'm terrified if it becomes illegal for me to have my, to be able to receive my shots. I don't know that I can survive. I might, you know, become suicidal. You know, I can't, you know, there's all sorts of pieces around that.
And I guess another question I have is, are any of the mental health professionals working with clients who are a place in their own development where they would be a good member of this team?
Well, I can certainly put it out there and ask. I know there's, what's it called? Equality Arizona.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that their name? And they do, this is Luna. She wants to join us. And I know our networking group is, those posts will show up by some clinicians who are hooked into that. And I know I listen to those posts, and they're keeping updated on. So I can certainly bring it into, you know, my consultation circle and see other individuals that might be willing to help out. Have you guys had some suggestions about, you know, what would what would be useful?
No, that's kind of what we're beginning the conversation on. What kind of events would help us to coalesce?
Yeah,
to
do those
support?
like, yeah, do those mental health professionals get together periodically, and would they be willing, if they do, to have a focus one meeting or part of one meeting on this topic to kind of see what they're thinking, what they would like to be involved in, whether they feel is needed, you know, to get the benefit of their wisdom.
Yeah, well, I can bring it to one of the meetings, you know, our consultation, and see if we, you know, if they want to get involved and somehow, and who'd be available to do that.
Yeah. Maybe that's part of the way we need to do future events, is we try to figure out how do we reach into each different community and see what the willingness is in those communities and the need there is. You know, they may say, no, just get your nose out of our business, right? But if there's any way that we as a group, as a larger, more diverse group can support each other, because I'm worried about that legislation as well. What
Yeah.
happens?
It's,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the importance of something like this is that we need to be cohesive, because, you know, it's that whole grassroots thing. If we're just too splintered and not organized enough and using our resources within the community of advocates, we're weaker, you know?
So,
just-
yeah, so does this mean, like, if we're thinking about this as maybe a way to go forward with mental health professionals, maybe Jim, you and is it Lewis and Meredith, who are all pastors, maybe there's some pastoral kinds of circles, interfaith circles that you know, you could do some convening around this and talking with them, and we think of all the others. I'm just trying to grab some of the easy ones.
So we have about 1 minute left, just so you know. And I would love to, April, just kind of talk at some point, so that, you know, I need to be able to look at a kid who's having something, or, you know, having some kind of doubts, fears, anger, abandonment, whatever it happens to be, and know that I can tell that person, I know somebody who might be able to be with you on this journey.
And you'll be safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely being able to refer to our, you know, our group to find clinicians that can work with individuals, even if that, just being able for us to, you know, pastoral circles to be able to say, hey, it sounds like you need some more mental health, you know, focus. You know, there's a network of queer psychotherapy, you know, emphasis, whatever, however you say it, you know, and you can refer.
And do you have any kind of fear that there'd be a backlash? It's time for us to go back. So we have 2 minutes to be able to.
I'd like to toss out that it might be helpful to contact some of the folks on the Alliance Fund board, because that's a powerful resource within the queer community in town. And there are movers and shakers on that.
That was the Alliance Fund.
The Alliance,
Fund.
FUND.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Alliance Fund is good too.
Yeah.
That's a
But the-
fund for a group too. It's
Yeah,
all-
the Alliance Fund is supported by the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona.
Right.
And it has an executive director, Andreas Cano, who is of course in the state legislature.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
We did reach out to Andreas to invite him to the meetings we already had, and I didn't ever hear back with him about if he just had a conflict or he wasn't interested. Kent Burbank is just now stepping down as the chair of that group, and maybe Kent, now that he's not going to be chairing the Alliance, maybe we could reach out to him.
Yeah,
I had lunch with Kristen Berner last week.
Okay, great. Yeah, and she and Colette, you know, great.
Yeah.
so you know, Kent Burbank used to be the Wingspan. He coordinated that.
So
Okay,
these, part of what I'm hearing is maybe one of the future events has to do with resources. What resources are out there and how do we get those resources into each other's hands
Mhm.
so that
Yeah.
we're not reinventing?
I think that's the biggest thing is networking our resources and trying to become more cohesive again because we're splintered. And now it's becoming more relevant again. And I think that's like the biggest thing to start with.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to check it out.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope your sessions were as rich as ours. What was really interesting is we were divided pretty evenly. I think it was 4, 4, and 5 people in the different rooms. And so I am going to tell you just a little bit about what we did in the future event meeting, the future event planning meeting, because I forgot to assign somebody else to be the recording person. And frankly, it was not near enough time for us. We barely skimmed the surface of some of the things that were out there. We talked about, like on the day that we had our Dare to Care event, we also had a morning event that was more kids. And we thought we really need to bring those voices back together into one session in some ways. And in fact, bringing back together was kind of a theme of much of what we talked about. How do we take a community and bring it into conversation with each other? How do we repair whatever the disjointedness is? How do we become more cohesive? How do we understand where all the resources are and bring them into a space where we can access those resources for each other? Because I think we all have some ideas of where those resources are, but are we helping each other as a cohesive whole to be able to do that? So we talked about, do we become a support group for each other? Do we become a resource group for each other? And how do we do all that? That's kind of where we were at. Somebody from the community education group, will you kind of tell us what you thought happened there?
Yeah, we, I think Louis summed things up for us pretty well in terms of the task. And it's not boiled down to any one kind of event, but as we look at the community education, and if you look at some of the input from people like Dr. Kurtzman, the people that need the education are the members of our churches, our faith communities, the predominantly white, heterosexual people that make up our congregations. Most of them are older, and we carry a lot of privilege. So there's that task of doing who we educate. The other side of that is the community building, and that's the question of how we become connected with the people in the society who are different from the group that I just described. And how do we meet those people on a common ground and equal terms, I think. Is that fair, Louis? So no specific plan. I mean, there's work that we can all individually do, and in our, particularly those of us who are members of faith communities, and everybody in our breakout group was a member. And okay, Louis just posted, like to amend that to say white cis folks. You know.
Thank you, Louis.
So I think that's a summary. We don't have a specific thing to propose or a specific leader of it, but I think we all are committed to be involved in this process as we go forward.
It sounds like you had some of the same thing. 30 minutes was not near enough time to be able to develop these very, very deeply. And so what I'm hearing so far is we need more time with each other.
We do.
And is that what I'm hearing? Let's hear from the
Yep.
other group, because you guys
Let
probably
let me
solved
just,
everything.
let me just say, definitely time, but I think there's something more than that that we need. Somehow we need to work through some of these connections and find another place to start with the next step.
Nice. Nice.
That's
How
what I
about
get.
political action? Who can tell us what?
I'm going to ask Meredith to recap our meeting. She was the recorder in that room.
Okay.
If I left anything out though, y'all just jump in and, yeah, so again, we kept talking until the very, very end. We could have kept going. And we really want to make sure that we're complementing work that's already being done by other organizations and other people. But the things that we really pulled out, it's so important to have more voices being heard, more stories being told. Especially at legislative hearings, just to have a larger group in the room. And it was mentioned that Lizette does a great job, Lizette at Saga does a great job at helping people get prepared to tell their stories. And so making connections with Lizette can help people get ready because it is a risk to tell your story or to come and tell your child's story. And so that was one thing. A second thing is to build maybe a database of people who are willing to get involved at the legislative level, especially people who are ready and able to jump into action quickly, because a lot of the bills get introduced kind of last minute, or there's a last minute change to something. And so if we had a database, especially with clergy and people from faith communities who are ready to show up. That way we can have a larger group of people in the room saying, you know, we're all here in support of this. And then the last thing, as nonprofit, especially, you know, for clergy and faith communities, we cannot tell people who to vote for and how to vote, but we all agree that voting is a really big piece of potential action that needs to go forward. And so while we can't necessarily tell people who to vote for, other organizations out there can, like HRC, maybe Saga, and maybe SAFE. And so the work that we can do is to connect people to those organizations. A lot of them have information on their websites where they tell you who is LGBTQ affirming, and so we can go and send people there.
And we definitely talked on that, is there's at least a certain amount of where we could become part of a resource for each other. So we have a better sense of, you know, like I loved meeting April. This was the first time that I met her. And can I tell just a bit of your story, that she's a counselor for queer individuals, and I need to know that community better than what I do, and so I need to know those resources. And each of you represents some different resources that way. That I think the more we can educate each other about those resources, the more we can be effective in this community. What did other people think?
May I just offer a quick word of advice for y'all? Some history you may not know.
Uh-huh.
HRC for years has had the worst reputation with people of color and trans people. So if you're trying to reach out to new people and going, hey, HRC, that might just close their ears immediately. So you need to know the backstory that you don't know. HRC is very powerful and also has done a really shitty job of intersectionality for over 30 years.
May I ask, is there a different organization that would be better for us to get to know and recommend?
Fortunately, almost all the nationals have the same backstory.
Oh,
The task force has been better, but all the nationals have the same backstory because they've neglected to do the work that you're trying to do, which is actually figure out privilege and drill down. They just kept building up instead of drilling down. And so There are a lot of hurt. They're better now. They've been working on it. There still hasn't been a mea culpa from HRC. So until they actually acknowledge the harm they've done, I'm not willing to give them a thumbs up, even though they're doing much better. And many of my friends work there. But I need there to be some acknowledgement of the ways in which they've harmed communities and isolated them and blackballed them and all those things. So I don't have a national to offer to you. I wish I did.
Well, and I'd love to have everyone's best ideas about what are the best resources. And I don't think we have to reinvent, but we do need to know what they are.
I know, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Sandy.
Oh, I was just gonna piggyback on what Louis said. HRC, I didn't know that about them. I'm glad to know that. I would say we infiltrate them and get them to do that work, because I can tell you from my perspective, without HRC last year, we would have a medical trans ban for kids. So I know that they were helpful in our community, organizing us to do what we needed to do at last year's legislative session. Knowing that, what you just shared, I'm happy to put their feet to the fire. But I think if there isn't another if they're all in that same space, then let's join and come alongside of and help them to come to terms with their past bad behavior and help them to be better. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wondered about trans families out of Seattle. Louis, do you have any insight around them? I know I've referred people to them, and I've been up to their conferences at Gender Odyssey. Oh, your sound is muted.
And there's so many that wish for that on a daily basis. I have been invited to Gender Odyssey a number of times, and I have not gone for the simple reason that I'm supposed to pay my way to go speak at their conference. I don't think so. And so their conference tends to be very white because, people of color are spending that money to go hang out with white people so they can go, oh, look, we have diversity now. Nationally, it's a bad situation. So I don't know about trans families and the good work. Like, again, HRC does good work. They just have salty history. So I'm not talking about working with them. I'm talking about outreaching to new members. Be very cautious about claiming them as your best bud, because that might nix what you're trying to say. That's all I'm saying. Be judicial about that. Maybe ask people that, hey, what national organizations do you support? So you can get a sense of where they're at before you make them close their ears to you. The Black Trans Advocacy Coalition, which was started maybe a decade ago out of Dallas, Texas, has a conference every year that is for Black trans people of every description and their friends, family, and community. And I would say that they are doing amazing work. They get funding from their local HRC. You know what I mean? We all, most of us are not going to say, don't give me that money. We're going to do what we need to do. But most of the nationals have a lot of work, and much like national government, it is very hard for them to be very aware and have some humility about the people who are not in their cipher. They're trying to do big national work. God bless them. I don't want to do that. Been there, done that. Don't want to do it. So I'm glad they're doing it. But for people on the ground, there's a great remove. One final, I'm not going to say one final anymore because that's a lie. The task force, which has Creating Change, this moving conference, my complaint to them is when they come to a town, the waiters make more money off of the task force than any small local LGBT organization in that town. They come and they have all these people come in, they make a ton of money. They spend the money in postage, but I've encouraged them, I don't know if they've done it or not, to find one or two local organizations that are suffering and channel that money to them, because they're not doing anything for the town they're visiting. They come in, they have a big party, they pat themselves on the back, and then they go home. But the same little 501c3s or people looking for a 501c3 and don't have the money, don't have the room, they're just as broke after the task force leaves as before they
So I love this conversation because this is exactly what we need to get into is what do we do to be able to change things? What do we do to be able to bring us into community? How do we protect each other? Because like I've talked with Dr. Kurtzman a little bit about the potential challenges that face her and those in her profession. That's challenging. Go ahead.
I was just going to mention, this is sort of tangential, and I said it in the breakout group, that tomorrow I'm flying to Montreal. Every other year, there's an international symposium for mental health and medical providers for trans people. It's the WPATH symposium. Anyway, it starts this weekend, and I'm hoping to find more advocacy resources there, and certainly get a chance to network with some of those people. Anyway, all that to say that I will make sure to make a good list of national groups, international groups that might be helpful. So
nice, thank you.
I'm wondering in the political advocacy space, whether or not Lambda Legal Defense might be a good one. The Kevin Jennings, who runs that now, actually was one of the founders of Andy's group nationally way back when, and is a gay man, and has a lot of good history of being a good collaborator and partner with people. They have, a very clear agenda, but they have wide interests too, and some great people.
I'm just wondering if we should be focusing more on what are the local resources and start with how do we strengthen our community and not focus so much necessarily on national kinds of things, or both and. How do we look at what the resources are in our community? And there are organizations in this town that have been around for a long time doing a lot of work, everything from the research and academic pieces at the university to the advisory council to the mayor and city council, to the offspring of Wingspan and all those other kinds of local organizations. So I think we need to do that balance, not just focus on the national, but also look at, what are some of the local and some of the state organizations, which are not quite as integrated as I would like to see them being or aware of things, but just toss that into the mix somewhere.
I can also say that Tucson Pride is coming up in like 2 weeks over the weekend. And I don't know if anybody from this organization or the faith organization is going out and tabling.
Yeah, we are the Reconciling Ministries group of the United Methodist Church. I'm on that committee, and Meredith and I are coordinating a booth, and we're inviting all of the churches if they want to come and participate. And so that's happening. We're doing the festival, we're not doing the parade. I know that Catalina also has a booth. They're doing their own thing. They didn't respond to my email to come play with us, but apparently they have their own booth, which is fine. So I agree. Being out at Pride and just meeting people and networking, and there's a ton of resources will be available. I would say as many people as can come out and even just enjoy the festival and meet people and collect cards and, oh, I didn't know this was happening. I mean, there's a lot of great resources.
Yeah, it's a great way to network. And certainly if we want to get lists of people who'd be interested in participating in something like this, and those booths could have some kind of list or to let people know, or I don't know.
I would also suggest, if you're going to have a presence at Pride, a table or something, I shouldn't say instead of, but in addition to giving out merch and stuff like that, it would really be a good opportunity to ask the LGBTQ plus community how they feel or how they think that the faith community can advocate for them. Because I've got this cis hetero white privilege. My kids aren't LGBT, and I don't want to be answering for them. I don't think any of us want to. So make sure that when you're there at Pride, that you are asking and that you're taking their advice.
It's a great idea. Thank you.
Meredith, you had something to say?
In our political activism group, one thing that we mentioned was the importance of local elections, especially school board. And so we weren't able to really get into that conversation, but just some way to educate those of us on, who to vote for, because school board elections are supposed to be nonpartisan. And so in my school district, I'm having a hard time getting information about the candidates and what they stand for and what they're going to do if they're elected. That's just to kind of connect in with Michael's point about what can we do locally.
My wife is an educator in Catalina Foothills, and there is a slate of 3 people who essentially don't even have children in the district that they can figure out, but they are essentially running as a slate to be able to say, let's empower parents, not not teachers, not and it's very much an attempt to take over that school district.
One of them is a psychologist here in town.
Yeah.
Say again?
Say that again, Michael.
One of them is a psychologist here in town.
Yeah.
And she's on the very much the fundamentalist track right now.
Could you please tell me her name? I have a list of people that I tell my patients to avoid.
I'm blocking on her name. She's one of the 3 candidates on the Back to Basics in the Catalina Foothills district.
Okay.
I will tell you.
It's Grace Jason.
Grace Jason?
Grace Jason. Yeah.
Okay.
Because school board elections are nonpartisan, it can be a challenge to get information about school board candidates, particularly when they are progressive candidates that are running in conservative districts, right? Because they don't like to advertise necessarily their progressive views. Because they don't have to, right? It's a nonpartisan election. They don't have to declare themselves as Republican or Democrat. And so it can be a challenge. Save Our Schools, although they don't specifically focus on LGBTQ rights, they do endorse candidates that are for protecting our public schools, right? And protecting our teachers, and not all about parents running the show. And so those same candidates that are endorsed by Save Our Schools tend to be a little bit friendlier to the LGBTQ community, but it is tough.
Okay, there is an article about the candidates for Catalina Foothills District in the current Desert Leaf.
Okay.
And
So if you get the Desert Leaf, look there for that.
right.
Or you can always look at the Purple for Parents website and see who they're endorsing and vote for the opposite ones.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm not familiar with Purple for Parents. Can you explain a little bit about them?
Purple for Parents was developed as the opposition to Red for Ed.
Oh.
So here's the question that lies before us. And what I heard from all 3 groups is we didn't get enough time to finish the whole discussion of what needs to be done. And we definitely felt that. How do we continue this conversation, and how do we then firm up some of the ways to move forward? At least one of the things I think that I heard was resources. How do we bring those different resources together into one space and share them with each other? What did everyone else hear? What do you see as next steps?
I'd like to see us meet again and take the ideas that we've put together, maybe all of the ideas together, and then we can prioritize and, you know, maybe assign some work groups to flesh it out more.
Is Zoom a good format for that for everyone? Or would you rather have in-person meetings? There's something very dynamic about being in the same room. I'm just not sure if that's how regular we will be at being able to get together that way, is why I ask.
Living in a rural community, I'm happy with Zoom than having to travel, you know, especially in the evening, if we're doing evening meetings up to Tucson, but
Yeah.
Well, and Zoom, I think most of us have gotten pretty comfortable. We've done a lot of it, and it has the capability of doing the small groups when we need to do that. I think, you know, there's a fundamental question really about how do we envision this coalition? Do we see it as being something that is very well organized and meets a lot and has a leadership structure and all that kind of task forces and working groups and all of that? Or do we see it perhaps on the other end of the spectrum, more of a loosely held together group of people who care and who are willing to be advocates and mobilized when they're needed on issues as they arise, or and periodically get together to, you know, sponsor some kind of community education event or some sort of outreach to churches or whatever it might be. And I'm not sure we all have the same vision for where we think we're headed. So it's hard to think about next steps because I'm not sure what our destination is.
Thank you.
I have one thing that I'd like to throw in the mix. Jim, you were talking about the future planning, and I think it's important. I have a wish that we're able to next year have another youth conference, much like we had in our morning segment on the 13th, because I thought being in that room was a powerful thing, and listening to the youth open up and provide that to them in the future. But I regret that because of some of the constraints around the legal constraints around identifying youth, that we don't have that body of people to be in connection with and hear their voice. And I'd like to see a better connection and allow the youth to direct us, to show us the way, essentially, because essentially we're doing it for them.
So was this kind of started with the youth in mind, since I'm not at the beginning of all of this? And were these youth in the congregations that are represented amongst the attendees here, or?
It was a mixed bag. It was a lot of people, a lot of kids who came from specific youth groups, different churches. I think one of the travesties for me as a pastor is how many kids have been essentially damaged in a way that they can't see a church as a safe place. And at least one of my goals is to try to figure out how to reverse some of that trend.
Okay. I'm just thinking, I was talking about some of the history of Tucson. We used to have a LGBTQ community center called Wingspan some years back and closed down in 2008. And Eon Youth Center was part of that. They're now with Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation, SAFE. And I believe they're meeting on 4th Avenue, and they have a lot of programs to support education, etc. I mean, that would be another good group to get involved to make some connections, because if the youth in the faith-based communities are not feeling like safe spaces, then to be able to find the other queer youth communities for them to be able to have an alternative of where they can go. A lot of kids wind up kicked out of their homes and on the street, and then it becomes a a mental health social services concern. But anyway, but yeah, that's one of the things that stood out. Scott?
Go ahead, Scott.
The only thing there, I mean, we were in contact with Eon and the folks at SAFE, and I think the people in that group probably did not feel safe to come to our location, or maybe not motivated. So wait a minute, Tracy, we'll catch you. And then it seems to me like we need to find a way to come to them rather than having them come to us.
Yeah,
I heard that a lot in our group, that we needed another way. Tracy?
So if you guys reach out to SAFE, they can tell you when the Eon Youth meets. It's at the Center on 4th, which is just north of 6th Street on 4th Avenue. And the Eon group meets, I think, at least once a week. And that's what I was going to say, is that rather than asking them to find their way to you, considering a lot of these kids don't have reliable transportation and stuff, I think that if you ask SAFE to come and talk to them, come and listen to them, they could probably set that up for you. And then they would already all be in a place that they feel comfortable, supported, affirmed. And you can go and say, tell us what we need to learn from you. Tell us how we can help.
So I have actually started those connections with SAFE with both Emerson and Sabrina. Emerson was amazing, gave me a tour of the facility and everything. The work that they do there, I just was so blown away that we had that resource here in Tucson. And so we've been talking about different ways that this coalition can get more connected, but especially our faith communities. And so we had a meeting with Sabrina about their desire to expand, because 4th Avenue location is great for some kids, but also not great for other kids. And so what can our churches do to share space and we won't be part of it, but just to give them space within our church campus where they can have a teen center after school or in the evenings, or free parent support groups or something on our campuses, so they don't have that overhead. And so those conversations are in the works, but this coalition could definitely help facilitate that.
and I don't know if there's like other community locations. Again, not knowing the kids and the youth and what some of their concerns are. If there is a concern about going to a faith affiliated environment, and that might, put individuals off or feel scared, if there is a more neutral kind of environment that might be safe. Transportation's a big thing. I mean, it needs to be in a location that's,
Accessible.
the buses. Like, I don't know about St. Francis if it's very accessible by
It
bus.
is not very accessible. We have a bus. We have buses that come within a mile, but they would have to climb up the hill.
A few years ago, we did kind of a conference with youth at, it's a community center that's on like 6th Avenue, but it's north of Speedway, and I'm blanking on the name of it. It's where I go to vote. It's a recreation center they have. What's that?
That's right over by you guys, right?
Yeah, it's not far from us, but I can't remember the name of it either.
I'll
I
find
can't
it.
either, but
I'll put it in the
we've done
chat.
this.
What about St. Grace down?
Grace St. Paul's?
Yeah, is it St. Paul's?
No, Grace St. Paul.
Great St. Paul's. Is
Yeah,
that the really huge one?
there's a pretty good sized one.
but that's out on the east side, right?
No,
No,
Grace St.
that's just
Paul
north
is
of
right down by the
Campbell.
university.
Yeah, that's Campbell and
Does
University.
it have the Labyrinth on the campus? Is that the one? Yeah, yeah. I've gone to concerts there. I used to be part of Desert Voices, and I know that they were using that one time as a venue, and that there's a lot of affirming community there. So, and that's downtown.
Yay, Desert Voices at Rincon UCC.
Yay!
We have the trans family group that meets on our campus, and the kids meet at the same time. One Saturday a month. I think it's the first Saturday of the month, and that's been helpful. And out of that, we have just this week, yesterday at a meeting, we have committed to turning part of our space into a trans clothing closet. We'll have one Saturday for young people. We'll have another day for adults. We don't have that young people adult weird thing that people like to point at being bad. And so that's just beginning, and we're just setting up. We're getting the room ready. We're getting clothes donated, getting the shelves together, getting the mirrors there. The good news is when trans families meet, that's where we're going to have our youth time, because there's already youth there. And the families can actually choose gender appropriate clothing with their children. What a wonderful bonding experience for them in that way. So we're trying to take little steps like that. That's what we're trying to do. And so I'm offering these as suggestions. Anybody can do it. We're not special. Y'all can do it
Louis,
too.
are you working with Alex Switzer with Valid by Brody?
No.
Okay, because there's somebody else in Tucson who's doing the exact same thing.
Awesome.
And you guys should get together. I'll send the information.
Please do. And because I don't want us to be bumping up against each other with times, because having my sense is the more the merrier. If you have alternate places where you can go and get gender affirming clothing, then yay.
Where is your location, Louis?
Broadway and Craycroft.
So
you're working with
one of our
the-
next steps is to start putting all of these things together in one place so that we have some kind of directory.
Do you have a database? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just saying that to give other people suggestions, not like because we're so awesome, but little steps. And
I know that Saga have some of you. I assume Lois, you have familiar with Saga's resources, but they have a huge database of information on gender stuff. And so, I mean, if some of this is really specific towards the gender community, then that is the like the clearinghouse for Tucson or Southern Arizona, actually. And so there's no reason to reinvent the wheel when they have been doing unbelievable amount of work for a couple of decades now. So we should definitely work with them. And I know it's changed over. I mean, I know Erin Ross, and she has been historically like the lead person with Saga, and but it's been handed over to new leaders, so I don't know any of them. I think it's a younger group. I did go to the Trans Day of Visibility, and so I'm not hooked in like I was before. Yeah.
I had a meeting with one of the board members of Saga a couple weeks ago just to say hey and introduce myself. And so I'm beginning relationship with them. So if you're going to use their resources, may I suggest to you that you offer them a donation? Don't just take their work and go, hey, thanks for doing that. I'm just saying, I mean, it makes a difference in how people feel like you're using them.
Yeah. All right, it's about 20 after. We could schedule till 8:30. What I'd like to do for our last 10 minutes is kind of think about, is there a time when we want to get together? Do you want to get together in a month, for example? Should we schedule another thing like that? But I also want us to just take a moment and say, this is how I feel at this moment. This is my current space of being about this stuff that we're doing. So feedback. How are people feeling? about where we are right now?
I think that we're just really in a preliminary stage, and I just keep thinking back to some of the other advocacy in Tucson on how we can learn from some of that and bring that here. It kind of feels, it's disjointed. Yeah, so it's kind of like we don't quite have the goals set. It's still sort of the brainstorming phase.
Yeah. And part of that's because both the community is very diversified and large, but also the different places where we come from. Medical community and religious community haven't always been in conversation. And in this case, I think we need and should be, but we just haven't developed that. And that's true about some of the other communities that we're talking about. Education community and religious community haven't always been in conversation. So you're right. Thank you. What else?
I think to piggyback on what April said, maybe coming up with a clear mission or purpose, what we hope outcomes will be. I appreciated the 3 different areas that we broke up into tonight. So that might be a place to start in creating those things. But maybe that's part of the space we're in right now. We haven't, maybe Meredith, you have some of that defined, because I know you've done a lot of work to get us to this place. But that might be, helpful to just really define who we are, what we're doing, and then we can figure out how we're going to do it. And I like the idea of, several different prongs, because it's going to take us doing events and education and political action and probably 20 other things, but we haven't thought of those yet.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I'm very hopeful after being part of this conference, Zoom conference, in that we have a rich collection of people that are able to move the needle, and especially from my group in a political activism way, that I think is going to be a place it's going to be very important that the nastiness of nasty legislation that's coming down be thwarted. And that can only happen at the ballot box. So I'm really excited about this coalition being a resource for activating people in that way. And so that's something I have.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm a little off center, off balance. I would like to see a greater diversity of people as part of this group. And I'm afraid of colonialism, folks. And how do we get the population that we say we want to help be part of the decision-making process in this group? And I would see an important next step is finding ways to reach members of those communities so they're part of this discussion. And I'm not quite sure how best to do that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good.
I think this is an important first step, and it feels like, for me, unsettling because it's not more inclusive. And that, yeah. And I'm not sure what to do with that.
Awareness at least helps, Michael. That's a good way to start. Anyone else? Then let me just say this. Very simple, thank you. I think conversation, being together, being present for each other and for the community is important. So thank you for that willingness to do that. Let's keep the conversation happen. We'll set up another event to be able to come together and begin to try to firm up more plans. Bye, Luna. That's the kitty cat.
Hey, hello, Luna. Don't give them kitty, but snuggles.
Thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having this
Thank you,
space.
folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.